The Ultimasaurus, a creature whose clandestine origins, bizarre build, and mysterious nature has captured the curiosity of millions. An amalgamation of beast, predator, and prey unknown and unexplained to mankind until now. Today, Goji Center's analysis platform will bring the Ultimasaurus to life, explaining its composition, abilities, and most importantly, its viability in combat against the already existing plethora of Jurassic World predators. Would the Ultimasaurus dominate Jurassic, or would it be a tragic disappointment? Make sure to watch till the end to find out. Subscribe and get ready to witness this latest episode, The Ultimasaurus Explained. This episode will be divided into 5 parts: its origin, genetic composition, viability in combat, engagements with other dinosaur species, and a special secret segment. Watch till the end to see what we have prepared. The Ultimasaurus was a cancelled action figure from the Kenner Jurassic Park Chaos Effect line of toys. This line featured many hybrids, but perhaps the most popular of these, and ironically one that was never brought to fruition, was the Ultimasaurus. But what if it was real? The first question to answer is, where in the Jurassic timeline would we have found this creature? To answer this, we must look at the methodologies that could have been used to create this hybrid. The animals that could have been used to create the Ultimasaurus would have been the ones that had their genomes sequenced in the early 1990s, during the time period where Jurassic Park at Isla Nublar was undergoing construction, and when the Isla Sorna establishment was operating at max efficiency. It's also possible that at least some of the animals would have been sequenced in the Lockwood Manor prior to the events of Jurassic Park. But how many dinos are we talking about? Right now, we know that this creature was composed of 5, which is much less than the amount of genetic contributors found in the Indominus Rex's genome, who was introduced much later in the timeline. This fine-tuned splicing methodology that was used to create the Indominus Rex allowed scientists to create a much more refined creature. So what does this tell us? All evidence so far leads us to believe that the Ultimasaurus would have been found early on in the Jurassic timeline. This animal does not have the appearance or amount of genetic contributors to be something that would be created around the 2010s circa era. This hybrid's chaotic, mishmashed appearance also makes us speculate that creating something like this animal would have happened before the events of the first film, but no later than the 1990s when the amalgam testing was underway on Sorna, the set of tests that brought the Spinosaurus to life. Therefore, in this cinematic universe, the Ultimasaurus would have been one of the first, if not the first, hybrid ever created. That is, in the Jurassic Park era, not Jurassic World. Now, let's talk about what dinosaurs made up this hybrid. As mentioned earlier, there seemed to be a total of 5 genetic contributors to the Ultimasaurus, the first and most prevalent being the Tyrannosaurus Rex, contributing to the general body shape, posture, and jaws. The next dinosaur in this list is the Ankylosaurus, whose genetics provided this hybrid's armored dorsum and tail club. Up next, and most notably, we have the Triceratops, whose genetic contribution gives the Ultima its distinguishable horned skull. But what about the arms and legs? This would have been contributed by raptors. And finally, these thagomizers on the end of this tail would have been courtesy of the Stegosaurus. It's important to note that all of these contributors would have had a significant contribution to the genetic makeup of this hybrid. To better explain this, we can look at the Indominus Rex, for example, whose base genome was the Tyrannosaurus Rex at least 50 to 60%. Everything else would have been shared with the rest of the contributors, leaving them with a smaller percentage. With the Ultima, it's evident that the genetic pool was distributed a lot differently, with approximately 30% being taken up by the T-Rex, around 20% Raptor, 25% Ankylosaurus, 20% Trike, and 5% Stego. Also, note how these attributes are almost shared equally between carnivore and herbivore. This will be very important to remember later in this episode. Now that we understand what this thing is made of, now let's find out whether or not this thing would actually make a good combatant. To determine the combat viability of this hybrid, we need to find out corporal attributes and size. So, how big is the Ultimasaurus? you'd be surprised to know that although this hybrid is usually depicted as a gargantuan super predator dwarfing the rest, this animal probably fell short of that description. Its figurine, despite being marketed as the big antagonist, was actually to scale with the medium to lower end of large carnivores. Furthermore, this figure was actually smaller than the Chaos Effect T-Rex. Toys aside, can this size difference be backed up by its animal's genome? Let's take a look. By accounting for all of its contributors, we see that the T-Rex would be the largest of these dinosaurs. The rest fall short by around 3 or so meters, with the smallest being the raptor. Meaning that there is absolutely no reason why this animal should grow a lot larger than a T-Rex, but also not smaller than this raptor. This averages out to a dinosaur that is similar to the figurine. But why can't it grow larger, like an Indominus for instance? Unlike the Ultima, the T-Rex was not the biggest animal in the Indominus' genetic pool. Here we find large predators such as the Dinosuchus and Giganotosaurus that helped it grow a lot bigger. In Ultima's case, we can suspect that the significant amount of DNA composition in this hybrid was also the culprit behind its shrunken size, especially since the legs and arms resemble those of a raptor, which are not built to carry heavy theropods, especially with tons of armor on their backs. The end result would be an animal around 3 to 3.5 meters in height, 8 to 9.5 meters in length, weighing at around 4.5 to 5.5 metric tons. This puts it at around the size of a Baryonyx or a Ceratosaurus. Anything bigger would just make this thing too heavy to function. Perhaps it's for the best, especially since it's heavily armored from head to tail. But will its weapons make up for its smaller size? This animal has no shortage of weaponry. Gigantic claws on its hands and feet, long arms allowing a good reach of attack, a tyrannosaur-like jaw, armor plating, spiked tail club, and the Triceratops horns. Immediately, one might think that this thing would now be invincible, but by looking at all this from a critical standpoint, we might have a few issues. Let us explain. This sheer diversity in body types leads us to think that this could be another case of the jack of all trades, master of none situation. The dinosaurs that contributed to this hybrid were actually built to be masters of their particular maneuvers and abilities, and anatomically built to carry those weapons. An example of this is the hybrid's armor. You may think that this animal was a good pouncer, but guess again. This armor and the relatively large size of this animal wouldn't allow it to spring off the ground as easily. This animal would much rather kick and pin the opponent down in conjunction with its arms, leveraging the weight from the armor and head. To be fair, this animal would still be able to be a good grappler, similar to the Spino given its long reach. The head of this animal is probably the most interesting, since it's a perfect split between the two most formidable herbivores and carnivores of all time, the T-Rex and the Triceratops. The frill space allowing for elongated jaw muscle anchoring would have resulted in this animal actually having a bite force comparable to that of a similar-sized T-Rex. It wouldn't have the bite force of a full-grown Rex, but very strong nonetheless once aided by the beak, slicing and hooking into flesh at the tip and crunching with these teeth. But would the horns do any good? This one is tricky, especially since this animal isn't specifically built to carry such a heavy head. Both the Trike and the T-Rex have special adaptations that allow them to swing large heads around. The outward splayed forelimbs of a Triceratops provide the perfect platform to effectively use these horns with purpose. And the T-Rex's strong neck muscles allowed it to bite, twist, and yank massive amounts of flesh, and lift up to 500 pounds of flesh and bone with each bite. The Ultima, not so much. Because it lacks the dense musculature and robust forelimbs, this animal wouldn't be able to use these horns as well as the Triceratops. Instead, it would perform lighter attacks such as fencing maneuvers, swinging its head, threatening to slash and stab rather than committing to a full-on charge. But against a large opponent with good grappling capabilities, these horns could actually be used against the Ultima. If grabbed by the horns, it would be easily controlled, pushed, or pulled down. So far, the conglomerate of weapons holds only some merit for the Ultima. But will its armor be of any good use? This set of osteoderms on its back would apply some protection against claws more than it would for full-on bites. Again, the big detrimental factor with having this much armor is sacrificing speed. more so if this creature has a theropod-like posture. Theropods usually have most of their weight distributed along the pelvis and tail. This, however, adds weight to the middle of their body, reducing speed, agility. However, it would be balanced thanks to the presence of its large head and arms. Lastly, we'll evaluate the use of its tail. For the Ultima, this would still make a viable weapon, but nowhere near as effective as a real-life Stegosaurus or Ankylosaurus. As mentioned many times, the contributing dinosaurs are specialized for using these weapons. Both the Anky and Stego have 4 limbs to keep them firmly grounded while winding up this weapon and striking. So, having both a club and Thagomizer would mean that this weapon would again be too heavy to swing without losing its balance. So, its use would be limited, especially during the heat of combat. So, with so many heavy weapons, this all boils down to one critical concern: balance. Even if its agility is relatively decent, the fact that this animal's entire body weight is carried on its toes and that it has a high center of gravity means that it could get knocked over if hit in these areas on the flank. Although it may still be able to defend itself while upside down, getting back on its feet would be a more difficult and lengthy process. So far, it seems that all this weaponry actually took form as physical ailments, meaning that if this was in fact a real animal, its best strategy would be to play defense, swinging its horns, keeping an opponent at a distance, and only engaging once it has a clear opening to use its kicks, grapples, and finish with a deadly bite. Okay, we discussed its combat viability, so let's now talk about how this thing would interact with other dinosaurs. Because this animal is made up of 5 different creatures, one question will probably pop up. Can this Ultima communicate or get along with any of its 5 contributors? How would these animals react if this Ultima shows up? Stumbling upon an animal such as a Triceratops would go a little like this. The trike sees the immediate resemblance to its own thanks to the horns, which are indicative of its species. The Ultima might be able to get some points across with the frill. After a moment, its theropod-like posture and peculiar sounds may register it as an unknown threat. Running into a dinosaur such as a Stegosaurus would be immediate chaos, given its stark difference to its own specimens. Its vocalizations would also cause swift alarm. We see that even though this animal is around 50% herbivore, it won't exactly get along too well with its contributors. But what about carnivores? Would it find any luck getting along with a Rex, for instance? T-Rexes already associate these corporal attributes as those belonging to heavily armored herbivores, but will probably be confused given that it most likely sounds like a T-Rex and it's postured like a theropod. In Ultima's point of view, running into a T-Rex will also most likely be a mixed reaction of sorts, with one instinct seeing the T-Rex as a fellow predator, competitor, or worse, its anti-theropod instincts kick in, causing alarm bells to go off and immediately get defensive. Same goes with raptors. The Ultima would have been a dinosaur of extreme reactions. Its herbivorous herding instinct may have made it seek out company with no promise of success when its predatory instincts kick in, and become even more defensive and violent once it catches a whiff of a giant predator. Which leads us to our surprise segment, Battle Rounds with Other Dinosaurs. That's right, the last thing to do now is to quickly assess whether or not this animal would fare well against some of the creatures found here in Nublar. Let's begin with the medium-tier carnivores, such as the Carno, Baryonyx, Ceratosaurus, or Allosaurus. Now, because we mentioned that this creature was well-armored and equipped with strong grappling weapons and a bite that is far stronger than these opponents, we find very quickly that these would be at a big disadvantage. Although not as fast as these creatures, the Ultima would win this by adopting a defensive approach, waiting for the opponent to come within range to leverage its heavy weaponry, pin the opponent down, and most likely win these encounters. We can even go as far as assuming that this creature will fare well or be on par with the Scorpius Rex. Yes, this guy has venomous quills, but this isn't an animal that's smart enough to envenomate and retreat. Even if struck, this Scorpius and Ultima would still engage in a physical confrontation immediately afterwards. A pretty even fight. But past this weight class, it won't look pretty good. For the Ultima, taking on creatures such as a Triceratops or an Ankylosaurus would very likely be a difficult endeavor. It looks awesome, but it's really impractical against the heavy class. This animal lacks the size and agility to maneuver around a highly agile Triceratops, who, by the way, is adequately equipped to handle these horned weapons. The Ankylosaurus is a similar case. Its low posture makes it almost impenetrable from attacks from above. On the contrary, this animal, who is equipped to use this tail effectively, will inevitably land a well-placed strike to these raptors' legs and would handicap this animal for life. Now for the big predators, such as T-Rex, the Giga, Spinosaurus, Indominus. Things look pretty grim. A T-Rex and a Giga's height advantage and much larger build would mean that this creature has enough mass to topple over the Ultima, exposing its underbelly and smaller limbs to a bone-crunching bite. Against the Spino and Indominus, things look even worse. These guys are grappling predators, meaning that its longer limbs and sturdy hind limbs power these guys to hold onto and topple over other smaller carnivores, and ironically using these horns against the Ultima to topple this thing down or keep it in place. So, is this Ultima a complete and utter failure? Not exactly. We have yet another surprise coming. It just turns out that although this build may not be the ideal ultimate dinosaur on this island, this project would have been on the right track to becoming a formidable creature with more refined techniques. So, we took the liberty to further develop this creature into what we like to call Ultimasaurus 2.0. Ladies and gentlemen, we present Ultimasaurus Imperatrix. In order for this thing to be the formidable beast that is promised, and for it to properly leverage every single weapon in its arsenal, we modified its genetic components as such. 15% T-Rex, providing the endocranium or brain, mandible, and neck. 10% Triceratops prorsus, providing the cranium, upper back, shoulders, and extra jaw musculature. 15% Borealopelta, an ankylosaurid providing more adequate and sharper dorsal armor and spikes. 10% Stegosaurus, providing some osteoderm formations, thagomizer, and pelvis. 25% Ingentia prima, providing limbs, mobility, and core body. And finally, 25% Alamosaurus, providing sheer mass, hind limbs, pelvis contributions, and air sacs. The biggest difference between the original Ultimasaurus is that this new one is now a facultative biped, meaning the hybrid spends a majority of its time on all fours, but is capable of walking on its hind legs when needed. This is necessary since most of its components and weapons are all derived from four-legged herbivores. Being bipedal is a hard limiter on how big this thing can get, so if we want this to grow up to 18 meters and 16 metric tons, this animal needs a more robust set of limbs. The body posture was changed from raptor to an animal known as Ingentia, a Triassic early sauropod that was comfortable on all fours and its hind limbs. Its wide frame, massive size, and stroud hind limbs are courtesy of Alamosaurus, who also provides internal air chambers which are connected to the lungs that increase oxygen flow, vent off excess heat, and increase stamina drastically. These sauropod passageways combined with the vocal cords of a T-Rex will cause this monster's roar to boom for many miles. Regarding speed, is this creature faster than the original Ultima? Not quite. Sacrificing speed for stability is the only downside of this creature. However, this now means that this massively heavy build will not only be impossible to top over, but also inflict extremely heavy damage. Ultimasaurus Imperatrix earns her name by being fine-tuned with the right balance of defense and weaponry. Its long reach and being armed and armored means that flanking this animal will now carry a huge risk of counterattack. At this level, a tail club is impractical, which is why the Ankylosaurus component was replaced with the Borealopelta, an ankylosaurid with denser armor layering and compatible with armor that both the Alamosaurus and Stegosaurus provide. This thagomizer of sorts is mounted on a long tail, capable of inflicting strikes many times more powerful than any Stegosaurus or Ankylosaurus could. Anything caught in the way of these would suffer extremely deep cuts, or risk getting cut into chunks by the impact. And now to strict offensive weapons. These forelimbs are the best of all worlds when it comes to grappling. Its large claw, courtesy of Ingentia, would concentrate the massive force behind any swing into this tip. This shape is perfect for smacking, stopping, crushing, and would make quick work of anything underneath its reach. And now to the business end, the skull. You'd be surprised that the combination of a Triceratops and T-Rex skull would work in perfect synergy. Both have really strong bite forces, but going deeper, the sheer mass and extra muscle attachment points found in Trike's frill help maintain this strong bite, despite blending both skulls. These teeth and beak will work in synergy, causing devastating crunching and cutting power. In combat, this thing would be a force of nature, attacking similar to a bear, rearing up and landing on the opponent using its deadly claws packed with immense force behind each blow, culminated by goring stabs and lethal bites. Subscribe if you enjoyed this episode. Let us know your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to check out our merch store. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.